I want to introduce our guest because Katie sort of set this up for us. She's the one who brought this person to our attention about 2 weeks ago. And as soon as we got to sort of know his background and his accomplishments, we jumped all over it. And we wanted to make sure we got him here as soon as we could. So in the studio is Bonner Paddock, which is a great fictional name for some book someday, right? I love that name. And let me give you a little background on what he has accomplished. A couple of years ago, he climbed Mount Kilimanjaro, the tallest freestanding mountain in the world, 8 days, 64 miles in freezing temperature. Do I have that correct?
It was really cold.
Yeah. And he just recently completed his first Ironman competition. And for those who don't know what an Ironman competition is, it's a marathon, 26.2 miles. It's a 112-mile bike ride.
Yep.
And a 2.4-mile swim.
Correct.
Yeah. So, and he's got a documentary that came out about the climb titled Beyond Limits. And he's got a new book coming out this next month titled One More Step. Yeah.
Perfect.
So I want to backtrack a little bit. I want to talk about first, between the Kilimanjaro climb and the Ironman competition, as an athlete, from your perspective, which of those two were more grueling for you and why?
Oh, Ironman Kona is the World Championships in Kona is the most brutal race on earth. So It's not even comparable.
Really?
Oh, yeah. It's a smashing all in one day. So the mountain, you can, if you're having a bad day, which we did on day 4, we can go down the mountain, kind of regroup, reset the tents, kind of take a deep breath, see if we can, acclimate better, and then go up again. You can always go back. Ironman is you got 1 day, you got 17 hours. Doesn't matter what the conditions are. If not, you got to wait 364 more days to give it another shot. And so it's kind of the pressure and just it's all compacted into 1 day is brutal.
Scott, there's so many people that do the Ironman and climb mountains. That's not sounding very impressive to me. I mean, I'm like, okay, so you got this guy. I mean, I couldn't do it, but I know a lot of people who can. What's special?
Well, we're going to talk about that in just a moment.
Okay.
Yeah, that's definitely the big question here. The training that went into Mount Kilimanjaro, how intensive was the training for that climb?
It wasn't as intense looking back on it, but for me, it was a huge step up in what I knew or what I thought was training and nutrition and those whole things. But one of my close friends, Jeff Weaver, was kind of right there by my side, would go to the gym really early with me in the morning and do a bunch of the hikes. But growing up here and at the time was living in Newport Coast, it was like, okay, well, there's not really big mountains around here that we could really go practice or, So we basically were in Crystal Cove and hiked, 4, 5, 6 times a day or a week right here. And that was the best we could do. But Jeff would get out there, go to the gym, and do a lot of the hikes with me. So.
And did there ever come a point in that climb where you were just basically at the bottom of your reserve and you were considering not continuing?
Many times that creeps into your mind.
Yeah.
And so I think that was what the great growth was on that specific kind of venture was, how do you tell yourself that that's not true, that you got something deeper inside you, keep digging, and go and finding something that you maybe never thought existed.
How about the elevation? Crystal Cove is interesting, but 1,000 feet maybe? So how do you deal with the elevation at Kilimanjaro?
Maybe. We did Mount Whitney all in 1 day. So we went all the way to the summit and back 1 day, and it took us about 15 hours. So at least it gave us a kind of a little bit of a glimpse, even though we knew we had to go another 5,000 feet, above that. But it kind of gave us a little look into the window of, okay, what happened to my head? And with the, equilibrium issues that I already have, it's like, what did that do? And it was pretty mind-numbing, I guess, of what starts even happening at 11, 12, 13,000 feet. It's amazing. It's not pretty. It's like your head gets in a vice, and that's the best way to do it, is you just kind of crank on that vice, and the pressure just is pretty immense in your your brain and on your head. So it's like worse than the worst hangover you've ever had.
Were there any deficiencies in terms of being able to process thoughts or anything, or was it purely like a physical type of symptom?
No, massive. It messes with your brain so much because your brain slowly expands as you go up for oxygen. So as everything expands, it starts pushing against your skull. So when that starts happening, your thoughts go. Think of it is again going back. It's like a big night of drinking, and then it gets worse and worse to the point where you really stop losing trains of thought. You're not able to assess the situations well at all, and they sit you down and have a bunch of checks and balances on summit when you go for the summit attempt that day. So it's a very interesting progression. It was also 50 below zero roughly out there. So, our water froze. We didn't understand. I mean, I'm a novice when it came to these things. So just the whole adventure of why I'd even attempt this is just the kind of comedic yet dangerous, a position that I put my own self in.
You got to be mentally as strong as you are physically, I would think, yes?
Yeah.
And so when you did the Ironman competition last year?
Yeah, 2012, October 2012.
In 2012, at what point during that competition did you sort of lose focus or think that you weren't going to be able to finish? Which of those three, whether it was the marathon, the biking, or the swimming, became the most grueling aspect of that competition for you?
For me, the hardest part is the bike. And I think we're going to get to the reason why the bike is the most difficult for me. But running is extremely hard as well, but nothing compares to the bike because it isolates 97 to 98% to my legs. And just in that prone position over the handlebars, and you got the winds of Kona, you got the heat, and things that we don't normally deal well with, and makes your body obviously perspire and try to keep fluids in. It's magnified based on what I have, and through that, the run, when I got finally to the run, my feet were already bleeding and pussing and bad before I even started the marathon portion.
So this is a nice transition then to sort of talk about, as Jim sort of pointed out, people have climbed Mount Kilimanjaro. People have competed and finished Ironman competitions. Your two competitions were a little more challenging because you suffer from
cerebral palsy. And so maybe for the listeners and the viewers, maybe we should first define exactly what cerebral palsy is and how that sort of affected your life growing up, and then how that affected the training and the climb and the marathon. Sure.
Or the Ironman.
Cerebral palsy is one of the most common disabilities out there, but probably the least known of exactly what it is. When I go speak a lot, I always ask people to raise their hands if they've heard cerebral palsy, and then I ask how many people actually know what it is, and almost 95 to 100% of the hands actually go down. And so it's very common. Literally was a healthy baby, per se, turned to go out the birth canal, umbilical cord got wrapped around the neck, and then it just starts choking you like a noose. And the critical time to get you out of the birth canal, random parts of your brain start dying. And with that, you don't control, and that's why you see such varying degrees of people with cerebral palsy, from people in wheelchairs, some people that need walking assistance, and some that really have trouble with speech and everything else, because it's random parts that just die of your brain. And so when you're born, they really kind of don't know what's going on. They're not sure what happened, especially back in the 70s. Definitely the advancements of technology of brain scans, MRIs, CAT scans, everything else really wasn't to the point, obviously, it is now. And to really fully understand what it was, our family didn't, and nor was I even diagnosed correctly until I was 11 years old. So that just shows kind of how there's so much overlap. A lot of people think it's CP, sometimes it's MS, just because I think of the acronyms and everything. But that's primarily what it is in general. I have spastic diplegia. It's the most common type of cerebral palsy, and that affects my lower half of my body. So my lower back, all the way to my feet. My brain is not able to fully tell that part of my body to relax. So if a person that is quote-unquote average in terms of muscle function, you maybe have 21 gears of functionality, like if you're shifting a car, in gears, think of it that way. So you've got your low, you got when you're sleeping, you're relaxed, and then you got like your supreme performance gear, like everybody's is different. But I probably have maybe between 5 and 6 gears is the best way to explain it based on what the doctors say. But I'm lucky because there's many, unfortunately, that don't have even but one. And that the default on the brain when that gets so bad, and when you see some kids that are very severe in a wheelchair and can't talk or anything, they have one function, and the default of the brain is your body locks up. So when your body can't communicate a message, instead of passing it basically being a wet noodle where your muscles don't work at all, it locks. And so what we've always tried to figure out is how do we unlock that part of my brain so that my muscles can work better in my legs. So I have extreme tightness. And I say it's like if you haven't worked out for 6 months, and I heard the fitness, we were talking about fitness earlier, and if you work out first time after 6 months, you're stiff, and you're like, well, that's what I feel like every morning. And I was talking with Katie, and it's like, it just gives it that moment. We just stiffen up so much faster. We have trouble getting fluids to those muscles. They tear and shred. And then quickly, it's very hard to replenish the nutrients into those muscles because they're always flexed tighter than the relax that we need the nutrients and, water and everything to go into. So to do these, endurance events that's why nobody had ever per se done those both. It's just, that's what's bizarre.
So no one with CP had ever climbed Mount Kilimanjaro
and done the Kona Ironman.
Kona Ironman. Jim.
So you say you weren't diagnosed until you were 11.
Yes.
So talk a little bit about as a kid.
Yeah.
Growing up in Orange County, sports are big and all. How did you fit into that world, and how were your symptoms then?
And your brother Mike is here as well. Older brother Mike is here as well, right?
Yes. Yeah, my oldest brother Mike, who is an extreme. He's a superior athlete. Growing up, it was awesome to watch him. He was all-American swimmer. He played tennis, won, the city championship. He just was a great athlete. And so even though my family chose to not talk about it, which is an interesting tact, and we can all be Monday morning quarterbacks, but it's a very interesting tact. And talking with Katie about her family, they talked about it right away and embraced it and was very positive about it. My family was a very siloed communication family. We really struggled to communicate. It was, parents got divorced at a very early age or separated at a very early age. So the communication structure just wasn't there. But I had my oldest brother, Mike, to look up to in terms of just such a supreme athlete. And so kind of growing up, I just tried to do everything he did. And when they said, well, Bonner's walking, he's talking, so let's just let him kind of do his thing and let's not really talk about it. But I would go to doctor's appointments, and as a kid, you don't really care about doctor's appointments. You want to watch cartoons and everything else. So we just never really knew. I think we went to 6 doctors, got 5 different diagnoses, in the early stages that, hey, I had an odd walk and, was a little bit later to ride a bike and was having balancing kind of issues, fall down a lot, trip a lot, skin my knees. And so they basically, 2 of the 6 doctors or something said that I had not spastic diplegia, but
it'll come to you. But
yeah,
let me ask this question while Mike's here. Growing up, were you competitive as brothers? And and then my follow-up question would be, do you think he's enough of an athlete to complete Mount Kilimanjaro and the Ironman competition? You don't mind, do you, Mike?
No, I don't.
So to answer that question, I just remember it's syringomyelia, which is even a crazier name, but that's what I was diagnosed, which is basically a disease that would sever my spine through basically the growth of tumors by 15 and probably be dead by 20. So that was kind of what my original diagnosis was. So I apologize. I just
don't
thought
worry
that.
about it.
The secondary thing is we were extremely competitive, and I had a horrible attitude as a kid. Brutal, I wanted to win at all costs and everything else, and he was the best. And so there were many times I hated to lose, and just always cried when I got scored on in soccer and everything like that. And he would out there, he had boxes of ribbons and medals. He had trophies through his whole room. And so for me, that was kind of our family was, I want to be as cool as that, because I thought that was cool. And, he was the most popular guy in his school. He's a good-looking cat. I don't want to let him, his head get too big, but he's a good-looking guy. He was a swimmer, so this guy was just in great shape.
Yeah.
So, everything that went along with just the coolness, my brother Mike was. And so I looked up to him, and my dad with the divorce and everything wasn't around as much. So him and my grandfather Bampa, who grew up in Laguna Beach, and lived here through the remainder of his life at the end, those 2 were kind of my father/big brother figures, and they both were insane swimmers. And Bampa swam in the ocean every day till he was 80 at West Beach right here.
Yeah.
So the combination of those things, we were extremely competitive.
In some ways, that may have contributed to where you're at today. In a lot of ways, no.
100%.
Yeah.
I totally agree.
And so you didn't answer my second question.
What was the second question? I apologize.
Could he make the same climb and the Ironman that you have done?
So, if I may share a quick story, because it's hilarious. So, the gentleman that I had the honor of being coached by is Greg Welch, and everybody calls him Welchie in the tri community. He's a world champion and arguably probably one of the greatest athletes to walk this earth. He was my coach through our Oakley partnership. And so Mike was out there, and he was amazing. He was by my side the whole process of Ironman. And he was out there, and when we watched it in 2011, the year before, we flew out there to watch it and train and everything with Welchie. Towards the end of the trip, we were over at the Oakley house, and we were just hanging out with Welchie having dinner, and my brother Mike was like, I think I want to give this a try, and Welchie's Aussie. He's an Aussie, and he's like, mate, I love you, Mike, but there's no chance, you're going to be doing this Ironman. So it's pretty ironic and funny, in my opinion, and we definitely laughed. It definitely hurt his, I think, ego a little. Dashed his hopes. But it was interesting to hear Welchie say that about him, and then say, well, there's a chance that Bonner, could finish it. That's when the mental strength, I think, starts going almost to more 80-90% is when it helped me on that end.
Interesting, yeah.
So in the midst of the Ironman, my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong on this, there's certain thresholds that you have to meet. They kick you out of the race, right?
Yes.
And so I understand you had some close calls in the course of it to actually, because they didn't create some special CP division that you two compete in, and you get a break and you get to take as long as you want. You're like everybody else.
That is correct. You start the same time as everybody else. You have your bike is racked right next to everybody else. It is probably one of the most pressure situations I've ever been, because you have 17 hours. Because we were there 2 years before. There was a lady that finished 2 or 3 seconds after the 17-hour cutoff. She got no medal. She got a DNF. She didn't officially finish that race, which is crazy. And it just stuck in my mind that was going to happen. So, yeah, you have to be off the bike by a certain time. I think it's 5:30 p.m. You have to be done by the race by midnight. And the swim, I think, is 2 hours or 2 hours and 10 minutes. You have to be out of the water. The swim was my best sport, and that was just growing up in the water, and then, training with Mike and everything like that in the ocean here. My upper body is actually pretty normal. I have great eye-hand coordination, but so the swim we weren't so much worried, except my legs kind of act like a rudder in the water because of the CP so tight. It pulls it down. It's hard to stay straight per se.
We handle everything from general corporate formation, partnership, real estate. We have a full-service litigation practice, and we also have a group of lawyers that handle bankruptcy and general insolvency matters.
We offer big firm experience with a small firm feel.
The person that you're hiring is the person who's going to be representing you throughout your entire map.
The slogan of redefining full service attempts to capture two things. One, an explanation of the breadth or the diversity of the legal services that we provide, but also to recognize that our service to our community does not end with our legal services.
Whether it's a pro bono opportunity where we're representing people for free, or whether we're actually volunteering on a project like Habitat for Humanity, for example.
It includes the philanthropic efforts, the volunteering of time, and the donating of resources outside just the four corners of this law office.
I played this club in El Centro one night, and I ended up sleeping on the linoleum floor. At some point, I got up and started writing a song. I wrote a bunch of stuff until I finally got a good line. And the next day, I found myself at a street fair in Old Town, and I saw this beautiful girl wearing these turquoise earrings. I knew right then I had to put her in the song.
Hi, I'm David Wilhelm, and this is Jimmy's Famous American Tavern. Jimmy's has been called a casual comeback for me. I think that's because most of the restaurants that I developed in the past were white tablecloth, upper-end restaurants. Jimmy's was designed as a place for friends and families to gather and enjoy regional American comfort food in a casual setting. Jimmy's Famous American Tavern. Simple and traditional.
All right, you're listening to KX 93.5 Laguna's Only FM. I'm Scott Hayes. This is OC Caravan in the studio this morning with my co-host Jim Bastian and Katie Fetters, and we're talking to Bonner Paddock, who climbed Mount Kilimanjaro, who just competed a year or two ago on the Ironman competition, and who did all of that despite the fact he has cerebral palsy. Yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about Team Jake. This was sort of the inspiration for why you're here, for the documentary, for the book that's coming out, et cetera. Could you kind of tell us a little bit about Team Jake?
Sure. Team Jake was formed, unfortunately, out of the sudden death of a 4.5-year-old boy that had a very severe case of CP. That's kind of my inspiration and the fire that started my foundation, OM Foundation. But his dad and my family, we kept kind of my disability a secret for almost 30 years. And being the first person to kind of that group that included Jakey's dad that I didn't know at the time, that was kind of the first public group that I said openly that I had CP. And he was the one that sent me an email and said that I gave his son hope while he was alive. And so we ran the half marathon in Orange County together in 2006. He was going to do the full, and we just really bonded on that run. And he ended up finishing that marathon, his first ever, for his son, and carried his son across the finish line. But his son died that night. And so I told myself at that juncture, the next year I'm going to run a full marathon in his honor. And his parents formed Team Jake after his passing, and they come back to the Orange County Marathon every year in the hundreds, and we honor Jakey by running a half or a full or a 5K. And it's better than Christmas for me. It's the most powerful weekend I've ever been a part of every year. I look forward to it more than anything else, and it's incredible for those people that have been part of it.
Talk a little bit about your involvement with CP. You know, it's a big charity. I'm sure you're involved with it, and you want to give back, and obviously with your story about Team Jake, that shows that. So how do you approach giving back, and what do you do on a regular basis? Yeah,
United Cerebral Palsy of Orange County was the ones that really helped me kind of start to deal with talking and being comfortable with having cerebral palsy, because I wasn't. And I always thought people would judge me right away, and it led to just a lot of mind games that I played within my own head, because I think people are going to not like me or judge me. UCP was fantastic. Coming back from Kilimanjaro and meeting these amazing kids over in Africa, I told myself I got to do more, and I formed my own foundation called OM Foundation now, that it's a global foundation. And I just said, you know what, I'm going to give all my money to it. And so I fund the whole foundation out of my own pocket. And so all of the speaking fees, donations, all my royalties and everything from the book, from my portion, will go to my foundation. So
what does OM stand for?
One man, one mission.
Okay.
And it's and it's just one of those things in life that I believe it's my mission now to hopefully inspire people and really let people know that most of the things we choose not to do are our own mental blocks.
And did you raise money from the climb of Mount Kilimanjaro?
Yeah, so I raised that money. It was a little over $250,000 for that. And then we raised, I think, over $750,000 around there for Ironman. So, I got to give a huge shout out to, I work for a Young's Market company here based out of Tustin, and they were the biggest backers of that. The employees donated. We did amazing fundraisers, and our owners matched every dollar that raised. And our chairman, Vern, actually lives here off Moss Point. So he's a Laguna Beach resident. And, them and Oakley have been the biggest partners pretty much throughout this whole thing.
And at the break, you were talking about the Team Jake Global Challenge with Oakley.
Yeah.
You want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. It's a global challenge that Oakley and I came up with. I got to give huge credit to Greg Welch again, and Dane Howell, and a couple other people that are at Oakley that my second version of Signature Eyewear is going to be coming out, and we're going to show and unveil it at the March 15th book launch party. But
let me back up. You have your own Signature Eyewear?
Yeah, they made one for me a couple years ago to commemorate summiting Kili, and it was just limited edition, 200 pairs, and they gave not 10% or anything else. They gave 100% of the proceeds to that eyewear to my foundation, because they said they've never had an athlete, which I don't know if I really am an athlete, but
well, you're definitely an athlete. Yeah.
One of those people,
maybe even better than your older brother. Nothing personal, Mike.
But they said they wanted to give 100% of it because of my foundation, so it's pretty cool.
So talk about the Team Global Challenge.
So the Global Challenge is you can't buy this eyewear this time. The only way you're going to do it is we're going to try to start people on their own journey that I started on. The first two physical things that I ever did was the half marathon and the full marathon in consecutive years. That was kind of what really lit the fire for me to do all of these other things. we know that everybody's life is different, but we believe if we can get people maybe off the couch, a lot of people have never done a half or a full. So if you do a half marathon anywhere in the world in 2015 and you do a full marathon anywhere in the world in 2016, Oakley and I will give you your own pair of my signature eyewear. So you just have to go to my foundation website and register, which is easy. You get a free shirt. You don't have to raise any money. We just want to inspire people to start an amazing journey, because what's happened outside of Kili and outside of Ironman is truly 99% of the magic that's happened. And those have just been kind of these foundations to really push me to the next level of how we can just inspire our own selves and like believe in ourselves and stuff like that.
How will the funds from your foundation be distributed? What purpose will it serve?
So what we do is we kind of have pods. So we have one in Orange County, and we currently have one in Tanzania, Africa. We are building one in Austin, Texas. And a pod basically means is we look for a partner, a charity. We do not have any staff. We have one part-time person that I do pay. It's my old boss at the Anaheim Ducks, which is hilarious that it's, again, it sticks to the family here. But you basically go in and we partner up with a charity of mission and vision, and we put together a whole, bid sheet and everything. They've got to come present to us and say, and it's our gift to that community. We don't want anything in return. We just raise the money to build a center like this or support a center that's already existing that is doing amazing things like Orange County. The Life Without Limits Center here with United Cerebral Palsy of Orange County is a beautiful kind of project that we want to just mass multiply and do it on larger scale. And the head of my medical team is out of Chalk, so we really want to build the most cutting-edge center in the world for gait analysis for disabled kids of neuro, so autism, Down syndrome, spina bifida, and cerebral palsy, and work through that community because it's something that I never knew or how to be involved with. So we want to build the best center on earth here in Orange County.
It sounds like an amazing journey you're on, by the way.
So with the challenge, is there another big event that you have planned? Are you going to go to Everest? What's next for you?
So I still don't have medical clearance to even exercise right now since Ironman. So it's been almost 2.5 years, just the body the toll that it takes on my body. It takes us a little bit longer to recover if we break bones or anything else. So hopefully I get clearance. If not, I'm going to be walking the half marathon in May for the Orange County Marathon. But it's really going to take that on. And I believe the next challenge for me is the book was actually more personal developing. I had to grow up a lot, and I was able to address a lot of the things growing up of, having some tough times, maybe getting teased and everything else. That book was my therapist to really unload and readdress a lot of things that I had tried to block out.
Let's talk. It's called One More Step, My Story of Living with Cerebral Palsy, Climbing Mount Kilimanjaro, and Surviving the Hardest Race on Earth. Bonner Paddock. It's through publishing through HarperCollins?
Yeah, HarperCollins and Harper One, yep.
And Harper One, and it's coming out in the next several weeks?
March 10th is the launch date. So you can get it on Amazon, you can get it on Barnes & Noble, you can get it pretty much anywhere.
Yeah. Katie, you had a question, yeah?
Yeah. What's something positive you take away from having CP kind of after all of this?
That's a good question.
There's no chance on earth that I'd be sitting here today if I was quote-unquote normal. I wouldn't have pushed myself. I don't think the challenges that I would have had in my life, and I don't think I would have truly been at a place now where I understand who I am as a person and actually love myself. I think it's something that I may have had a nice job and done some nice things, and but it truly was always my driver, both negatively in the first 30 years of my life. I used all the negative criticism that I got to say that I'm going to prove these people wrong, but I would do it through work and be successful at that. But that's really, I learned, is so shallow and not what I wanted. Now it's loving myself and loving who I am and sharing this gift that even if you look at me as saying it's harder for me to go do an Ironman or anything, that really all the limits are what we put on ourselves. That's it. And I'm just not going to try to put any of those limits, both mental or physical, ever again.
You have a second question?
Yeah. I always kind of wonder this. What is something you wish that people knew about CP?
I just wish people would not be afraid to come up to people that are different, and especially kids. I mean, we're so impressionable, and you see, unfortunately, some horrible things that kids are doing to each other out there. And if they're in a wheelchair and everything, we actually like to be approached. We do. If we walk different, no big deal. It's okay to come up and ask us, engage us with a smile and ask, but don't stare. Don't look at it. That's not what life is about. It's about actually loving each other and literally just coming up and asking. It's okay to ask. We want that. And the kids light up because they're usually not able to do a lot of sporting events and everything. So go up and just say hi and everything. It will change their life more than anybody else. It smiles and happy and thank yous and please. That's what life is about. And it's free.